Hello everybody and welcome to another YouTube video. In today's video, I will be showing you how to make an API in Go. Now specifically, we're going to be using a framework called Gin. This is a high performance and relatively simple web framework that allows us to very quickly design and create an API in Go. Now, before I get into the actual content here and start writing any code, I just want to give you some prerequisites because this tutorial is not for absolute beginners. So I'm going to assume that you have some familiarity with Go. If you do not and you want to learn Go, I have an entire tutorial series on this channel. So I'll put something on the screen and there'll be a link in the description to that series. But I'm going to assume you have some familiarity with the language and with APIs. Now, I will explain a lot of the API concepts like a GET request, a POST request, a response, a request, but it will be helpful to have some of that knowledge already. And that's pretty much it for the prerequisites. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the video after a quick word from our sponsor. Thanks to ServerPronto for sponsoring this video. ServerPronto provides dedicated bare metal servers and private cloud hosting that you can rely on. ServerPronto's unique data center is a service model that lets you get the benefits of having your own data center like customization, full access, and the security and reliability of a private environment without the huge upfront investment. With ServerPronto, you select the setup that is perfect for your use case and pay a fixed monthly fee with no surprise costs. ServerPronto will even help you set up your server, provide 24/7 support, give you full root access, and personalized solutions. Whether you're building the next tech startup, deploying a hobby project, hosting mission-critical business tools, or just looking for an affordable place to back up your data, ServerPronto has a solution for you. You can get started with ServerPronto today by clicking the link in the description and get 10% off by using the promo code CREATOR21. Thanks again to ServerPronto for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into it. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Now in front of me, I have Visual Studio Code. This is the editor I'm going to use for this video. You can use whatever you want, but I will recommend VS Code just because of the built-in terminal. That's going to be helpful when we're actually testing our API. Now, I've also created a Go file called main.go. You can name it whatever you want, but please put it in a folder. So I have a folder on my desktop called Go API Tutorial. Now, you can ignore the .vs Code. It's just storing some settings related to my VS Code environment. Anyways, other than that, I'm going to assume that you have Go installed already and it's all set up on your machine, because what we need to do now is install some dependencies for this project, specifically the Gin framework that I mentioned in the intro. So we're going to be using Gin, high performance, high productivity web framework, pretty popular in the Go community. However, it's typically for simple APIs or simple web applications. If you're doing something more advanced, there's lots of other frameworks that you can look at. But for something like this, just a very simple API, Gin is great, so that's why we're going to use it. Now, to install this dependency, the first thing we need to do is set up dependency tracking for our Go project. So to do that, I'm going to go to my command line, so my terminal or command prompt, depending on your operating system. I'm going to go inside of the folder where my Go file is here, and I'm going to type the following: go mod init, and then example / and then the name of my folder, which in this case is Go, if I can type this correctly, API tutorial. So you can see my folder is Go API tutorial, and I have go mod init, example / Go API tutorial. Now this is going to create a go.mod file, which is going to keep track of the different dependencies. Now the example here is what I would recommend you use as well. Usually this is supposed to be the path to where you could download this Go package from. I don't know exactly how this works, but essentially, since we're not actually going to be releasing this package for other people to install, we just put example and then the name of our folder. Someone else in the comments can probably clarify exactly why we do this, but for now, just do example / and then the name of your folder. So I'm going to type enter here, and then notice it's going to create a go.mod file. You can see it right here. All right, so now that we've done that, we're going to use the go get command to download the dependency that we need, which is the Gin framework. So I'm going to type go get, and then this is going to be github.com/gin-jonic like that, / and then gin. Let me make sure this is correct. Looks good to me. I'm going to type enter. This is going to take a second. Once it's finished, we should see that it actually installs this framework, and then we'll be good to go, and we can start writing the Go API. All right, so the Gin framework is now installed. So what I'm going to do is quickly describe the example we're going to go through here for actually building an API. Then we'll do all the import statements and everything that we need. So for this API, I want to build kind of a library API where we store a bunch of books, and we're able to check in a book, check out a book, add books, view all of the different books, get a book by its ID, all of that kind of stuff. That'll give us a few different functions we can write and routes that we can have for our API. So to get started, I'm going to have my import statements here. Now I want to have net/HTTP. This is built into Go. We also want to have the one that we installed. So github.com/gin, jonic/gin. And then we want to have errors, which we'll use later on. Now we're getting red lines because we're not using these right now. That's fine. We'll use them later. Now, since we're going to have a library, we want to store books. Now to store our books, we're going to use a struct. So I'm going to create a type here. I'm going to say type book struct, and then I'm going to put a bunch of field names here. Now it's important that the field names start with a capital letter. I'll explain this in a second, but this will make it an exported field name. And for our API, we need that. So I'm going to say ID. This is going to be a string. I'm going to say title. This will be a string as well. Did I spell title correctly? Of course I did. Okay, title, that's going to be a string. We want an author for our book. Okay, this will be a string as well. And then lastly, we want a quantity because a library probably has 2 or 3 versions of the book. Okay, now we'll go with int for that. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to add a few things to this struct, which are going to allow it to be serialized and converted to JSON, so our API can actually return the struct directly, or it can take in kind of the JSON version of the struct and convert it to a struct in Go. I know this seems a little bit weird, but essentially we're going to be using JSON for our API, so JavaScript object notation. That's kind of the standard thing we use in APIs, and we're going to be returning that. We're also going to be receiving that as data if we wanted to say add a new book. So here, I need to make sure that this can be kind of represented in JSON, and the way I do that is by adding another, entry here at the end, which is going to be the JSON representation or the JSON field name for all of these fields in our struct. So I'm going to put backticks, so backtick JSON, then I'm going to put in double quotation marks the lowercase version of this field. Okay, so let's continue here. This is going to be JSON and then title. It's going to give it to me, nice, JSON and then author. And then what else do we want? JSON and quantity. Okay, so let's explain this for a second. Why is this? I need the other backtick. Okay, there we go. So the reason I had the uppercase names here is because this makes this an exported field, and that essentially means that it's a public field or that it can be viewed by modules outside of this module that we're in right now or outside of this Go file. So that's why I had to make these names uppercase. However, in our JSON, we want them to be lowercase. So we add this field here that essentially says when we are serializing this with JSON, convert this field name to lowercase. Or if we're taking a JSON object and turning it into the book struct, then we're going to look for the ID lowercase field and convert it to the ID uppercase field. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, you need to make sure all of these are capitals so that they're all exported. If you want to see what happens if you don't do that, then you can make them lowercase, and you'll notice that every time you try to return books, it's just going to be an empty JSON object because it wasn't actually able to read all of the different field names from this struct. Okay, I'm hoping that makes sense. I understand that might be a little bit confusing. Now, I'm just going to copy in something here, which is a list of books or a slice of books. You can, pause the video and copy this in if you want. Also, I'll leave the code in the description. But we just want to have a data structure that represents all of our different books, because for this API, we're not going to implement a database. We're just going to do all of it in memory. Now, if you had a real API, you would use a database, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this tutorial. So I've just created a slice of the book struct. We have a bunch of books here. So we have, In Search of Lost Time, The Great Gatsby, War and Peace, and we have our quantities as well. Now we're going to allow people to check in and check out the books. That will just increase the quantity or decrease the quantity. Of course, I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so now that we've written this, what we're going to do is write our main function. So we're going to say function main. Now inside of here, we're going to set up our router, which is going to be responsible for handling different routes and kind of the different endpoints of our API. So what I'm going to do is say my router is equal, and then this is going to be gin.default like that. Let me make sure that's correct. Okay, that looks good. Now what we can do with the router variable is we can route a specific route to a function. So for now, I'm going to write a function. I'm going to call this function getBooks. And what this is going to do is simply handle the route of getting all of the different books, right? So it's going to return the JSON version of all of these books. Now, the way we do that is we need to accept in here something known as a context. I'll explain this in a second, but for now, we're going to say g.context is the type that we want to accept, specifically a pointer to it. Sorry, this is going to be gin.context, not g.context. And then all we're going to do is c dot and then indented JSON. And we're going to return here http.status OK. And then the JSON that we want to return, which in this case is just going to be our slice of books. Okay, I understand there's a lot of stuff that I haven't explained. I just need to write kind of this boilerplate code, and then I can go through all of it. Okay, so now here, I'm going to type router.get, and my root is going to be /books, and then I'm going to route this to my getBooks function. Okay, then I'm going to say router.run, and is this a capital? Yes, this is a capital, and I'm going to run this on localhost port 8080. Okay, there we go. So let's take a step back. Let me explain what I just did, because we've actually just implemented an API here. So what I did is I created a router. Now the router is coming from gin, and this is going to allow us to handle different routes. Now the route that I want to handle here is /books, which means when you go to localhost :8080 /books, it's going to call this function, and this function is going to take in a gin context. The gin context is essentially all of the information about the request, and it allows you to return a response. So here I do c.indented JSON. And this just means we're going to get nicely formatted JSON that has the proper indentation. The status code of this response that we're sending here is status OK. And then what we're sending as the data is our books. So since I added these fields here, right, I added my JSON ID, my JSON title, my JSON author, my JSON quantity, this book struct here is able to be serialized, and we can also serialize a slice of this struct. So what's going to happen is we're going to return a JSON object that has all of these books in it from this function right here. Now notice that I had a GET request. So that means if you're sending a GET request to this route, then it will handle, or it will call this function. However, if you send a POST request, it's not going to handle that because, well, this says GET. Now, in terms of running our router or running our web server here, we just do router.run, and then we put the IP address that we want to run this on. Now, in this case, I'm just doing localhost. I'm running this on port 8080. You can pick pretty much any port that you want. Okay, hopefully that makes a bit of sense, but that is the basics for creating kind of a very simple GET request or a very simple GET endpoint on our API. Again, the indented JSON is just giving us a nice formatted JSON. We also can return files. We can return HTML. We can return all kinds of stuff. The status OK here is coming from this net HTTP module. This is just going to go to 200. We need to first return a status response saying, okay, what was the status of the request? Well, it was okay, so that's why we're using status OK. And then what's the data? Well, that's books, which will be automatically serialized for us into JSON. All right. Now I'm just going to comment out errors here because we're not using this quite yet. We'll use that in a second. So what I want to do now is test this API and see if it's working. So the way that I can do that is simply run my Go file. So I'm just going to type go run, and I can type dot, or I can type main.go. So I'm going to do main.go. Let's give it a second here, and you can see that it's listening and serving HTTP on localhost :8080. Now to test this, we need to use the curl command. So I'm just going to open up another terminal by splitting this here. Let's move this all over. And I'm going to use the curl command. You can use this on Mac, Linux, Windows, and we're just going to curl the endpoint that we created, which is /books. So I'm going to say curl localhost :8080 /books. Let's go like that. Okay. So when I do that, you're going to see that we get our indented JSON, right? And we get all of our books being returned to us here. And notice we have the lowercase field name, not the uppercase field name, again, because we have our JSON stuff right here. Okay, and then you can see the response came in here. We have status code 200. We got, or we're getting, the /books endpoint. Perfect. Now let's quit this. So I'm just going to Control C to get out of that. And we can now close this, and we'll get back to that later. Okay, so we have now just created a GET endpoint. What I want to do next is add an endpoint that allows us to actually add a book to this slice. So to do that, I'm going to say function add book, or actually let's go with create book. Again, we're going to take in our context. So gin.context, just to reiterate, this stores all of the information related to a specific request. So if you had query parameters, if you had a data payload, if you had headers, all of that type of stuff is going to be in this variable here, which is C. So I'll show you how we actually get query parameters and how we can get the data associated with a specific book. So we have create book, and inside of here, what I need to do is get the data of the book that we're going to be creating, right, from the request. So to do this, I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to say var new book is of type book. And then I'm going to use something from C here, so from our context, to actually bind the JSON that was a part of the data payload of this request to this book object, or to this book struct. So I'm going to say if error equals, and then this is going to be c.bind JSON like that. And we're going to try to bind the JSON, again, that's a part of this request, to the new book struct. Now we're passing the pointer to new book so that we can actually directly modify the field values. And then we're going to check if we got an error or not. So if the error is not equal to null, that means that we did actually get an error. And if that's the case, we'll simply return. Now, when we return, this will automatically pass a, a status message as a response. So if we just return from a function without actually using the indented JSON or something else that I'll show you in a second, then what's going to happen is it will just automatically give kind of an error response. Now, we'll test that out in a second to see how that works. But for now, I'm just going to return inside of here. However, though, if I don't end up returning, then we will have bound the JSON to this new book struct. So now we have a struct that contains all of the data that was passed to this function or to this endpoint. So what I can now do is append this to our books slice, and then I can simply return a status message and a response. So I'm going to say append, and I'm going to append, I forget what order I do this, but I think I do book to books. Let's see if that's correct or if it's the other way around. Nope, I did it wrong. So it's going to be books to and then new book like that. And then what I want to do is c dot, and then again, we're going to do indented JSON, except this time for the status message, we're going to say http.status, and this is going to be created like that. Okay, status created. And then for the data, we'll just pass new book. Now, what is the error here? Value of type book is not used. My apologies here. I totally forgot that I need to do books is equal to, and then append books new book. I come from many other programming languages, so often I make that mistake in Go. Anyways, there we go. We have books is equal to append books new book. What is the problem here? Function create book is not used. Okay, we're going to use that in 1 second. Okay, so just to quickly recap what we did here, we created the variable new book, which is of type book. We then tried to bind the JSON of the request data to the new book by passing its pointer. If we got an error from doing that, we simply returned, which is going to automatically pass kind of an error response message back to whoever sent this. Then we're going to have books is equal to append books new book. So if we didn't get an error and we were successfully able to bind the JSON to this book struct, then we have a new book that we're creating. So we're going to create that book by simply appending it to the books slice. We then are going to return the book that we just created with the status message or status code status created. Great. Okay, so now all we need to do is actually add a route for this. So we're going to say router dot, and then this is going to be post, and we'll post to /books and then create books. We'll use the same endpoint, but we'll just have a post request here that's going to create the book, and a get request is going to give you the different books. All right, so now we can actually test this API. So to do so, I'm going to run the Go code again. So let's go run, and then this is going to be main.go. I'm going to split the terminal, and we're going to use the curl command. However, since we need to send JSON data to the create book endpoint, what I'm going to do is create a file here that's going to contain kind of the data that we want to send as JSON. It's just going to be easier to write it in a file than it would be to write it directly in here. It's going to get really messy. So I'm going to create a new file. Let's just call this body.json. Let's not save it as Django text. Let's save it as all files. Okay. And inside of here, we'll define our JSON. So we want an ID. The ID is going to be a string. This will be equal to 4. We want a title. We can go with Hamlet for the title here. We want an author. So let's type that in here. This is going to be William Shakespeare. I think that's how you spell his name. Okay. And then we'll go with a quantity, and this will be equal to 2. Now, again, make this whatever you want. I'm just doing a real book. I think that makes sense for this example. Okay, so that is our body.json. So now our API is running. Let me just close the file view, and let's now send a curl request to it. Let's get rid of this untitled file too. So I'm going to say curl localhost :8080 /books. Now we're going to do an include. So we're going to say that we want to include a header. This header is going to be content-type application/JSON, because that's the type of data that we're sending. And we're going to do -d for data. And then we're going to do the @sign, and this is going to be body.json. Now, I think that's actually all we need to do. We might need to make it so that the type is a post request. So let's just do that as well in case this isn't going to work. So I'm going to say -request, and then in double quotes, we're going to do all capitals post. Okay, so let's hit enter here and see if this works, and notice that it does. So we get a 201, we have post and then /book, so 201 status created, and we get our book back, ID 4, title Hamlet, author William Shakespeare, quantity 2. Awesome. Okay, so I think that is it for testing that. Just to quickly go through this curl command, because I went through this fast. We are curling to localhost 8080/books. We're going to include the header. I actually don't even think you need to have the include, to be honest. The header is content type application JSON, defining the type of data that we're sending. -d stands for data. The symbol means a file. So we're going to say @body.json because that's the file that we want to use for the data. And then we specify the request type as a post request. And there we go. We send the request using curl. Great. We have now created that. So now let's send a curl request and look at all the books. So HTTP, actually, we don't need HTTP. We just do localhost 8080/books. And when we do that, we now have ID 4. Hamlet has been added as a book. Great. Okay, so let's continue here, and let's now look at how we could do something like checking out a book, checking in a book, getting a book by ID. Let's actually do getting a book by ID first. All right, so to get the book by ID, I'm going to write a helper function that will return to us the book object represented by a specific ID. Then we'll write a separate function that handles the root. So I'm going to say function get book by ID. We want an ID of type string, and then we're actually going to return a pointer to a book, and we're going to return an error. Now, the error could potentially be nil or null or whatever you want to call it, and the reason why we're doing this is because if the book that you requested or the ID that you requested doesn't exist, then we need to return an error, right? So let's re-import errors because we're going to use that in here. Okay, so let's do a loop and look for the book. So we're going to say for I, comma, book, and then colon equals, and actually I can't even do book, I have to do B, colon equals, and then range books like this. So we'll loop over all of the books. We want to check if the book ID is equal to this ID. So we're going to say if b.id is equal to ID, then we want to return, and we're actually going to return books at I, but we're going to return a pointer to it. So we're going to turn ampersand books at I and nil like that because we don't have an error if we actually find the successful book. And then the reason I'm returning the pointer to the book is so that we can modify the attributes of this book or the fields of this struct from a different function. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. That looks good to me. And then here we will simply return nil, and then this is going to be errors.new and then book not found. Great. So I think that's all we need for get book by ID, just telling us that's unused. That's fine. So now let's write a function that will get the book by ID. So we'll just say book by ID. Okay, and then here we're going to take C, and this is going to be gin.context. And then what we want to do is say that our book is colon equal to, and then this is going to be get book by ID. And we're going to pass for the ID which we now need to get. So I'm going to say ID is equal to c.param. Now, param means that this is going to be a path parameter. I will show you that in 1 second, but essentially it would be something like /books/2. Now, that would be the ID. 2 would be the ID, right? I'll show you how we set that up in the root. Okay, so that's the ID. So we're going to say book is equal to get book by ID. Going to pass the ID. However, we also could potentially have an error. So we're going to say book, comma, error is equal to this. And then we're going to check if we have an error. If we do have an error, then we need to, well, return an error to the user. So we're going to say if error does not equal nil, like that, then simply return. This will just give us a bad request automatically, as we saw before. Otherwise, we'll just return the book. So we'll say c.indentedJSON, http.status OK, and then this will be book. Okay, now I think that is going to be good. I don't think I need to dereference the book. I might need to. We'll see if this is going to work though. Okay, so we have book by ID. Now let's set up the root for this. So let's go to main and we'll do another get. We're going to say router.get and we're going to say slash books slash and then colon ID. Now this is how you set up a path parameter. So as you saw here, we had c.param. Now this is going to access whatever's associated with the ID parameter in the path. So if I want this to be a parameter, I just do colon ID. It's going to default to a string type, and then it will give me that when I'm actually handling the root. Hopefully that makes sense. I think that's straightforward enough though. Let's now make this go to book by ID. Okay, now we can test this out. So let's rerun our API. Okay, go run main.go. Let's clear this. Let's send a curl request to slash books slash, and let's just go with ID2. Notice we get ID2. Now, of course, ID4 is not going to work. So we're going to get, it gave us 200. That should have given us a bad request. Okay, I'll look at that in a second. But book 4, I just wanted to show you, it wasn't going to give us something because we were storing them in memory. So even though we added a book in the previous test run of the API, it wasn't going to be there. That points out an error. So let's see how we can fix that. So I was just looking into this error here and I realized what the problem was. So what we were having was we were getting a status code of 200 when we actually wanted to get the status code of 404 not found. So it wasn't returning us any data, but it wasn't giving us the correct status code. And well, I'm going to explain the reason. So first, let's look at create book. So in create book, I kind of falsely mentioned before that since we were returning, it was automatically giving us a bad request status code and giving a response. Now, the return statement is not what's doing that. It's the c.bind JSON that's doing that. So since this was getting an error, it was automatically returning a response saying that the request was bad. And then we were just returning from the function. So we didn't end up doing any of this. Now, what I did was I kind of thought that we could just return here and that would automatically give us a bad request. That was incorrect because, again, the c.bind JSON is doing that. Learning experience for both of us. So what we need to do in here is we need to actually return a custom response saying bad request or saying 404 not found, and then whatever data we want to return with that, and then return. So we're going to say c.indentedJSON, and we're going to do http dot, and then status. Actually, I don't want to go with bad request. I want to go with not found. That seems to make more sense here. And then what we want to return is the following. We're going to do gin.h, and we're going to say message. And for the message, we can just say book not found. Okay, exclamation point like that. Or we can just go with the period. Now, the gin.h is kind of a shortcut to allow us to just write our own custom JSON like that. It actually maps to a type that has string to an interface. I'm not going to explain exactly how that works, but just for now, you can type gin.h, and that allows you just to write here the JSON that you want to return. Okay, so now we can test this out and see if it's going to work. So let's run our API. Let's then send a request here with an ID that doesn't exist. And notice now that we're getting 404 and it says message book not found. Very good. We have now fixed that. Okay, so let's just shut off the API. And now what I want to do is write two more routes. One to allow us to check in a book and to check out a book. Or I guess return a book and check out a book. Now, what these methods are going to do is they're not going to validate that the correct person is checking them in or checking them out or whatever. It's just going to subtract one from the quantity of the book and then add one to the quantity. And it's not going to let you check out a book if there's no books available, right? So if the quantity is 0. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's kind of what I'm going to go with here. So let's write a function here and let's call this checkout. Is checkout one word? Yeah, I think we can do that. Checkout book. Let's take in our context, so gin.context. And then what I want to check in here is what book we want to check out. We're going to do that by the ID of the book, except this time I'm going to accept that as a query parameter rather than a path parameter, just to show you how we handle those. Now, the query parameters are what comes after the question mark. So you have question mark like x equals 2. That's a query parameter in your path, right? So let's see how we get that. So I'm going to say ID colon equals, and then this is going to be c.get and then query like that. And we're going to look for ID. Now, what this also returns is an error. So it has ID error is equal to c.getQuery. So if this ID does not exist as a query parameter, then we get an error. So the first thing we can check is if error does not equal nil. So if it doesn't equal nil, then we need to return a indented JSON. So we're going to say HTTP status, and then this is going to be bad request because you didn't pass the correct query parameter. And then we're going to say gin.h. And for the message this time, we will say invalid or missing ID query parameter. Okay, there we go. That's good. And then we can return. So what's the error here? It's saying cannot convert nil to bool. Okay, so error, sorry. This is actually okay. My apologies. So we're going to say if okay is equal to false, meaning that this key does not actually exist as a query parameter, then we'll do this. It's not giving us an error. Instead, it's giving us a Boolean telling us if the key exists. Okay, so we're going to check that. Now, if we do actually have an ID, then we're going to try to get the book. So we're going to say book equals get book by ID, but we're going to do book comma error like that, and we'll get the ID. And then similarly to before, we're going to say if error does not equal nil, then we can just return what we already have here, which is book not found. So let's go book like that. And then lastly, we can actually return the book, and we can subtract the quantity from the book, saying that, okay, like we've reduced the quantity because you've checked out one book. That reminds me, though, we need to check to make sure that there is at least one book for them to check out. So let's check that. We're going to say if book.quantity is equal to 0, let's just do less than equal to 0. Then we want to return a message. Very similar here. So we're going to say c.indentedJSON status. I guess we can just go bad request. We can say book not available. Okay. And then return. And then lastly, we can say book.quantity minus equals 1 to reduce the quantity if they were able to check one out. And then we'll return what book it was that they had. So we'll say status okay. And then we'll say gin.h. And then this will be a message, or not a message, sorry, what am I doing? We're just going to return the book. Okay, so I think that is good. Let's quickly recap what we did here. So we tried to get from the query parameter the ID. We checked if we had an ID or not. What is it saying here? Should omit comparison. Okay, so let's just do what they say here. Let's do not okay rather than okay equals false. So we're going to check if we actually had ID as a query parameter. If we did not, we're going to return the message missing ID query parameter. And then if this is not the case, we are going to try to get the book by the ID. If the book does not exist, we're going to say that. And then we're going to check the quantity. So if the quantity of the book is less than 0, you can't check it out. So we return an error message. Now, if all of those things are false, so we don't get into any of these conditions, then we're going to subtract the quantity by 1 because we're going to check out this book. And we're going to return that this was okay. And we're going to give them the book. Now, we also could give a message maybe and say something like book checked out. But for now, I'll just give them the book. That's fine. Okay, so let's add a root for this. So this time, since we're going to be updating something that currently exists, I can use a patch request, and we're just going to do /checkout, and then we will put this to checkout book. Okay, so let's test this before we move on to checking in a book or returning a book. So let's go run main.go. Okay, and then we want to send a request here. Now, this is going to be a little bit more complicated than before. Localhost :8080 checkout question mark, and then we want ID equal to let's check out book 2. And we're going to do -- request, and this is going to be patch. I think that's all we need. Let's run this, and there we go. Okay, we were able to check out a book. Now, when we get the book, is the quantity less than it was before? Let's see. So the quantity that we had was 5, and when it returns to us the quantity, it's giving us 4, which is telling us, okay, we did indeed update the quantity of this book. Sweet. So that seems to be working. Now that we have checkout functioning, let's actually just try this a few more times. So I'm going to check out quantity is 3, check out quantity is 2, 1, 0, and now book not available. Perfect. So that is working. Let's try with an ID that doesn't exist. So ID 4 says book not found. Let's try without the query parameter ID and missing ID query parameter. Perfect. Okay, so that is all working. Let's close this. And now let's write the return book. So let's go function, return book. Okay, this is going to take in our context. So gin.context. Let's look for the query parameter for the ID that they're going to be returning. Or, yeah, I guess we'll just do it as a query parameter. We'll let them return by just saying the ID of the book they want to return. So we'll do what we did before. I'm just going to copy actually all of this. Okay, so let's go Control C and Control V, because if they try to return a book that doesn't exist, well, we can say book not found. And after we do all of that, what we want to do is update the quantity by adding 1 and then return, I guess, book returned successfully or just the book. So we'll say book.quantity, and this will be plus equals 1. Okay, and then we'll say c.indentedJSON, status okay, and then return the book. Now, I am just noticing here that we are doing a lot of repetitive work in both of these functions. Now, I think for now, this is fine. I'm not really going to clean it up, but you could probably separate this out into another function and then kind of use that, from here as well as from here, because we are doing the exact same thing twice, at least for these, 10-ish lines of code. Anyways, I'm going to leave it like this for now. I think that's fine. Let's implement the root now for this. So let's say router.patch. And let's go /, and then for this one, we will go return, and then this will be return book. Now, while I'm here, I've realized that I forgot to mention get, post, and patch requests. So the get request is getting information, the post request is adding information or creating something new, and the patch request is updating something. So we are updating the quantity of the book. That's why I'm using patch. You might be able to argue for using a different type of request here, but I think this is fine for now. Okay, so let's test the API and see if we can return books as well now. So let's go run main.go. Let's now send a curl and let's check out a book. We can check out, let's say, book with ID 2. So ID is equal to 2. Okay, now let's try to return it. So rather than check out, let's just go return. And looks like the quantity gets updated and we added 1. Now to test some of the errors here, let's go ID 8. Okay, book not found. Let's try to do it without the query parameter. Okay, we get the error message. And now let's try to reduce the quantity so much that we can't do it. So ID 2, or actually, sorry, I guess we can't even do that because we're just returning a book, so it should just keep going up. Okay, awesome. So with that said, I think that's going to wrap up this video. Again, I just want to give you an introduction to this framework and show you how to make a simple API. There's, of course, a lot more stuff that you can do with this, and I would encourage you to read through the documentation, which I will link in the description. But I think this was a good start. We have get, post, patch. We know how to send JSON data, how to receive JSON data. We know how to serialize a struct, which is what we did right here. We also know how to get the context, how to return different status codes. We understand how to handle the errors. Yeah, we did quite a few things here, and hopefully this was a good introduction to the Gin framework and creating a Go API. With that said, I will end the video here. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in another one.